us today. Seems like the world's in a crazy place at the moment. I know higher education in the UK is quite chaotic, and the mountain bike industry, of course, is in a difficult place. So it's always nice to join everybody for it seems like a refuge for me. It's a nice place to discuss the thing I love among like-minded company and people who share my interest in mountain biking, and in this case, mountain bike trail building. So just for those of you who may not be familiar with our group and what we do, my name's Jim Cherrington. I am the founder of Cultures of Mountain Biking, or CoMTB for short. And we are the first group globally of its kind to focus on why mountain biking matters culturally, I guess, around the world. We're in, as you'll see probably from the people that are in attendance today, some of whom are members of founding members of CoMTB. We're an interdisciplinary, culturally diverse and global group of researchers whose aim is to understand the social, cultural and political significance of mountain biking in contemporary societies. Comprising members with backgrounds in lots of different disciplines, from we've got artists, we've got community development workers, psychologists, cultural studies scholars, journalists, marketeers, coaches, from a wide range of different disciplines. We're all, I guess, united in trying to help organisations involved in mountain biking and outside of mountain biking to address a range of identities, bodies, environments and inequalities. One of the methods that we do this, of course, which is why you're here today, is through our quarterly seminar series, which takes place 4 times a year. And I guess overall, as part of a broader range of activities that CoMTB are involved in, the point of these sessions really is to encourage evidence-informed discussions between landowners, governing bodies, sport brands and policymakers, to name a few. And in the process, what we're really hoping to get out of this really is to develop a joined-up approach in trying to find applied solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems. And if you know me, you'll know that I make no apologies for making some rather broad claims on behalf of mountain biking and what I think it can do in solving some of those problems. Today, as you might have seen from the introductory gumph or some of the things you've seen online, we're turning our attention to the practice of trail building. And there's, I guess, 2 questions that we're asking today together. First of all, can the increasing professionalisation of trail building help to reconnect people with meaningful and craft-based work that encourages communal engagement and perhaps even ecological stewardship? And secondly, which is the topic of our first presentation today, can public and or state authorities play a role in encouraging this? Attempting to answer some of these questions today, or at least attempt to, we've got Jan, who couldn't be with us today, but is the one of the co-authors on this paper, Evan Bungard Everson, my apologies if I'm butchering the pronunciation here, and Matilda Skov Christensen, who will present on how public authorities can support co-production of mountain bike trails. I'll then follow, so these guys will go first, I'll then follow with a presentation with some recent thinking of mine on the professionalisation of mountain bike trail building and some of the implications of that on, you know, in terms of answering some of those big questions we all have about where the world's at the minute and what some of the problems with it might be, and how mountain biking trail building in particular might solve some of those problems. So that's just about it from me. We're going to go, like I said, Evald and Matilda first. They're going to present for 20-ish minutes. We'll break with the normal format today because Evald and Matilda have to leave us, unfortunately. So hopefully we can have a little bit of time for questions once their presentations have come to an end. Then I'll present. We'll still have the usual time at the end for questions if you have any, so feel free to, in fact, I encourage you please to pop those in the chat or ask them out loud at the end if you've got them. The session will be recorded, so please bear that in mind if you're asking questions. If you have a bad hair day or don't want to appear on film, just bear that in mind. And then the recording from today's session will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which is CoMTB. You can find that on just by using the search function on YouTube. Okay, that's everything from me. Matilda, I believe you've got the slides if you'd like to share those. I don't like formal introductions, as I mentioned earlier, so I'd much rather you just give an introduction to yourselves and your own work, if that's okay. Ready when you are.
Okay, do you see a picture of some trail builders right now?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Great. Okay, but then I can start, Eva. My name is Mathilde Skov Christensen, and I'm working at the University of Southern Denmark as a PhD fellow right now. And the reason why we are here today is to present some of the research that we have done a couple of years ago about volunteering in mountain bike trail building and co-production in trail building. And these projects, yeah, we have done in a collaboration, Jan and Eva and I. And maybe you will say something about yourself, Eva.
Yeah, just very briefly, I am at the University of Southern Denmark as well. I'm an associate professor and head of a research unit that bears the name of Center for Research in Sport, Health and Civil Society. That's pretty broad, but as Matilda said, we've been fortunate enough to have this particular interest in the last couple of years, and looking forward to tell more about it today and hopefully pave the way for future collaboration in different ways as well. So yeah, over to you again, Matilda.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and the reason that we have taken up this focus in our research center is that we have, in this center, we have had a great interest in co-production processes during the past years. And what we have seen in Denmark is that municipalities are becoming much more aware of the benefits of involving volunteer citizens in the delivering and the development of social welfare services. And the benefits that the municipalities see in the co-production processes is that it gives them an opportunity to deliver welfare services that are not just more effective and of higher quality and to a lesser cost, but this co-production process also gives them an opportunity to create involving democratic processes where the citizens are active and take on a responsibility for their local community. And this greater focus on co-production in the municipalities does also account when it comes to mountain bike trail building. And I'll just take the next slide here. Okay. Yeah. And there can be many reasons for that, but one reason is that also in Denmark, mountain biking has become more popular than ever, and the greater number of mountain bike riders prompts a need for more attractive and more sustainable mountain bike trails. And as you can see at the map of Denmark here to the right, there has been established a great number of mountain bike trails in Denmark during the past years. And also when it comes to this process of building mountain bike trails, as you know, there are lots of considerations to take into account. It's not only about serving the needs of the mountain bike riders, but also to take into account considerations for nature or other recreationists, and also the cost for maintaining these trails. And altogether, this has actually made mountain bike trail building a quite complex task to overcome for the municipalities who wants to support this positive development in the mountain bike culture, or sport. And in this situation, partnerships across these public authorities and the volunteer trail builders may be one of the things that can help overcome some of the new demands which are in trail building. And the research that we have done, we have done two different research projects. One is a national survey where we have asked volunteer trail builders how and why they contribute to mountain bike trail building. And the other one is a multiple case study we have made where we have examined co-production in mountain bike trail building in 3 different municipalities in Denmark. And the aim of these 2 studies have been to find out why do volunteers engage in mountain bike trail building, and how can different approaches to co-production help generate favorable conditions for mountain bike trail building in Denmark. And it is the case in Denmark that many of the mountain bike trails, as I just showed you, they are built in a collaboration between public authorities and volunteer trail builders. And the 3 municipalities that we have examined in the multiple case study, they are all examples of quite successful co-production processes in Denmark. And what these 3 municipalities have in common when it comes to mountain bike trail building is that they are all providing good settings they are all like providing good settings. Providing good settings for mountain biking is a part of the municipality's strategies and policies. So it is something that is very important for these municipalities to prioritize. And also all 3 municipalities, they are giving high priority to trail building. They are supporting volunteers both financially and with human capacities. And volunteers in these 3 municipalities, they do play a really important role in the trail building. They take it's the volunteers who take the initiative for building the trails, and they are also involved in the planning and the establishment and the maintenance of these trails. So the volunteers play a really crucial role for having these trails built and also designed. And when we look at why the volunteers they choose to contribute to the mountain bike trails building, it becomes very clear that the trail builders are very much motivated by altruistic motives. I can just put up the top 5 motives among the volunteer trail builders here, and actually the reason why they are contributing to the trail building is that they want to contribute to the local mountain bike trails. They want to provide others with good mountain bike experiences. They want to support the development of mountain bike trails, meeting all levels of mountain bikers. And they want to support the effort of the local volunteers. And then finally, they also would like to have mountain bike trails close to where they live, because all of the volunteers who participated in this survey study, they were mountain bike riders themselves, so that makes sense too. But this shows that these volunteers, they are actually in it because they want to provide others with good mountain bike riding too, and not only for their own sake. And furthermore, the findings of our studies also show that the volunteers do actually possess the strongest trail builder competences compared to the municipality, to the employees in the municipalities. And taking this into account, it seems like, or it is like, that the volunteer trail builders, they constitute a great capacity to the municipality. Because of these volunteers, it becomes manageable for the municipalities to have established mountain bike trails, which are of a relatively high quality, and which actually can accommodate the needs among the variety of different mountain bike riders. And that is even on a relatively low public authorities. Yeah. So, yeah, and knowing that, the interesting question is then, okay, but what does then actually form a successful co-production in mountain bike trail building? How can the municipality support the volunteers in a way that makes them want to contribute, and creating a collaboration between the public authorities and the volunteers that but also to the municipality in overall. And that is what we have tried to dig in deeper in one of our studies. And I just need to yeah, because when we look at the literature that have been made in this field already, and the literature regarding co-production in general, we can see that that there are some central factors that contributes to form successful co-production processes, and one of them is that when the municipality has compatible structures, then it is positive for the co-production process, and also when the municipality have a welcoming administrative culture, it will influence the co-production process positively. And I will elaborate a bit on that in regarding to mountain bike trail building, because what we see from our finding, the multiple case study, we can also see that having compatible structures in the municipality, and that is like having financial support for the volunteers, and having human capacities as people that the volunteers can contact in the municipality, and also offering practical assistance that can help make the trail building more effective and manageable for the volunteers. And that will, on one side, influence the volunteers' motivation positively, because they will have a feeling that this task will be manageable and also more enjoyable. And it will and can contribute to an increased number of trails built, because the progress will be speeded up when there are machinery and money which can support them, or practical assistance which can support the volunteers' work. I don't know how many of you have been involved in mountain bike trail building. Probably some of you have, and then you will know that even though it can be a very rewarding task, it is also strenuous work. And several of the volunteers that we have interviewed, they told us that they started out with pure manpower, but they had really high ambitions of how many kilometers of trails they were going to build. But after only a short time span, they had to admit, okay, we cannot do this only with our hands and a shovel. This is totally unrealistic. And yeah, so they faced that they needed further assistance, and they needed machinery to actually being able to build the trails that they wanted. And in this light, then the support from the municipality play a really crucial role for the volunteers to progress, and also hindering or avoiding that the volunteers won't burn out or lose their interest in the first couple of kilometers. But at the other hand, we did also see in our data that offering is especially practical assistance might involve a risk that the volunteers won't feel the same responsibility or ownership of the trails, and An example is in one of the municipalities, they had hired a professional trail builder who were responsible for the overall process of trail building, and he was also responsible for having having the contact with the municipal employees and the contact with the Danish Nature Agency, who was also involved. And in this municipality, some of the municipal employees and also this professional trail builder actually highlighted that they did find it challenging to find trail builders or trail bosses who would really be engaged in the trail building. There were lots of trail builders who would like to show up just one day or two and help, but it was hard to find someone who would really, put their energy in it and take it as a greater responsibility. So, with what they said, one of them said actually that when there's always someone to do the job, then why should the volunteers come and spend their free time on this when there are someone who got hired for it? So there seems to be some kind of dilemma here, or a balance, which is important to be aware of. Yeah. What we also found is that that when the municipality have this a welcoming administrative culture, it does on one hand make the trail building process run more smoothly. A welcoming administrative culture, I mean having key persons in the municipality which the volunteers can easily get in contact with, and having an easy decision-making process, and also having a positive and trustful attitude toward the volunteers, making them feel that, showing them as a municipality that they believe in the volunteers and that they have faith that they do their best to build high quality mountain bike trails which take into consideration both nature and safety and other recreationists. Yeah, so that will influence the process positively when there is this welcoming administrative culture, because it's critical for the volunteers to have a chance to get in touch with the municipal. There are lots of things to take into considerations when building mountain bike trails, and a lot of questions can occur when you are in it. So it's the process will run more smoothly when it's easy to get in contact and easy to make decisions. And the thing about the trustful attitude that also contribute to the volunteers feeling that they have more freedom and that they are and that they and that is something that many of the volunteers they appreciate. But on the other hand, it becomes also important for the municipalities to be aware that this welcoming administrative culture should not only account for mountain bike riders or trail builders, but also for other kind of recreationists or volunteers in general, because the municipality are obligated to serve all different kinds of citizens and all different kind of volunteers. So just to be aware that it's not only the mountain bike riders we have to support, but there are also other volunteers to develop and to develop facilities for their activities. So to sum up, there are as I started out to say, there are a lot of benefits, but also some pitfalls of involving volunteers in mountain bike trail building. first the volunteer work and they form a great working force in all the phases of mountain bike trail building when it comes to a lot of the trails here in Denmark. And they do also have a great insight in the users' needs because they are also mountain bike riders themselves. And they do also have much stronger competences often than the employee in the municipality or in the Danish Nature Agency. And as we saw, speaking about their motivation, they do also have a wide focus on creating mountain bike trails for the variety of users and for riders of all levels. But there might also be some pitfalls that the municipalities have to be aware, because one of the pitfalls might be that voluntary work is voluntary, that it is their free time they spend on this, and you cannot, you have, as a municipality, you have to think about how to support their motivation so they will keep finding it enjoyable and manageable and interesting to contribute to the trail building if you would like them to stay volunteers. And then the municipality should also be aware that the volunteers' abilities do not always match the ambitions of the municipalities. In one of the municipalities that we examined in one of the studies, they started out with having an aim of building 100 kilometers of mountain bike trails. That was the aim over the next 3 years in this municipality. And that's sounded very great and ambitious. But when you have just spent the whole day of shaping this tabletop or this great berm as a volunteer, it seems quite unrealistic to manage to build 100 kilometers of mountain bike trails, right? Yeah. So there is something also about, it's, all of you think it's so great that the municipalities want to support this area, but there has to be a balance in what the municipality wants and wishes for, and then the work that the volunteers can actually contribute with. And then the last thing here is also this what I mentioned before, that the municipalities have to be aware that voluntary mountain bike trail builders are of voluntary volunteers in the green area, and they only represent one user group. So it and as a municipality of other users also when it comes to outdoor recreation facilities. So you can say, just to sum up, the question you asked in the beginning, James, was if public authorities play a role in supporting this mountain bike trail building, and based on our findings, we see that they do actually play a crucial role if the goal is to build high quality mountain bike trails. But it doesn't seem like more support is necessarily better, but it seems like it's more about finding a balance where the municipality support the volunteers in a way that they stay motivated and that they keep finding the trail building an enjoyable process and a manageable process, but also without taking the responsibility away from the volunteers. So they have to feel also that they actually do have a responsible for these trails, and that they have something to say, and that their meaning counts, because that is also something that the volunteers appreciate, and which will contribute to their motivation to keep being engaged. Yeah. Yeah, and if you are if you're more curious, then you can read more here in the 2 papers that we have been written based on on the studies that we have made. And yeah, as I said before all you other guys joined, we would like very much to keep on doing research in this field, and now we have done these studies in Denmark, but actually we think it would be great to generate more knowledge about how does co-production in trail building differ across different countries, and what lessons can we draw from the different kind of examples on co-production in this field. And then we are also interested in user conflicts among outdoor recreationists, and in this regard, we also find it interesting to find out if this co-production thing in trail building, if it also has a potential in order to reduce conflicts among mountain bike riders, for instance, and other recreational users. So yeah, that is something that is some of the questions that we find interesting to work on in the future. But I would also like to hear if you have any comments on these, or will share your experiences.
Matilda, thank you so much for your presentation. That was really insightful and really carefully delivered. I think it's really interesting to see the kind of nuance of that relationship between the volunteers and the various authorities. I believe I don't want to. I'm really keen to open the floor to questions, but I'm also very conscious of the time. Do you have to shoot off?
Yeah, actually I do. So yeah, sorry, but but I think Eva will stay
I can
a
stick
bit.
around for a while,
Yeah.
so I can answer any questions. So you can just
Okay,
leave me in the spot and see if I'm able to do that.
She's
and
thrown
then
the
you have to
grenade,
tell
and
me
now you
about
have
it.
to.
Yeah,
You have to tell me about it tomorrow. So
I will.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
no problem. Yeah.
But hopefully we'll see you again.
Yes, thank you, Matilda.
Yeah. Thank
Much
you.
appreciated. All the best.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, I'll open the floor for questions. Does anybody have any questions for Evald?
Yeah, I've got my hand up. Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, thanks so much. That's really interesting. I didn't know that mountain biking was such a big thing in Denmark. That shows my ignorance about the geography of Denmark.
Quite surprising, as we haven't got any mountains, so that could be a part of the reason why you have that.
That's what I was thinking. But then, that might be my kind of trails. Maybe not too steep. Maybe nice, kind of, heathland sort of. I'm sure you got lots of forest and open country. So I don't have much experience of volunteer trail building, just a little bit, but my experience has been not with a municipality, but with a body in the UK which is called Forestry England, which is the public government body that looks after our forest resources across the whole country, and they provide free to use trails within the forests which are open to all kinds of recreational activities. So they have trails for walking, for running, but they also work with volunteers. So they have paid professional trail builders that work all to the appropriate standards of safety, and they take into account the needs of the forestry business. They're a business as well in terms of growing and felling trees. But they work with volunteers too. And I was kind of interested. I wonder, I'm just speculating what the difference is between that and a municipality, or maybe it's just the same. They're just a different bit of government in a different country. I didn't survey the trail builders and understand their motivations, but I think there's some of the things that you were saying about wanting to give back and want to be part of a community of like-minded people. But they also work very carefully, Forestry England, with users, because what happens is there's illegal trail building that goes on.
And pirate trails.
And they're like, no, we have to shut that one down. That one's dangerous. Or you can't do that. So please come and talk to us, and we'll take suggestions. And so it's like this careful balance between working with people who are the users and who want to do different things. And I guess sometimes there's conflict and sometimes there's cooperation there. So I guess maybe you had some of those challenges too in Denmark.
If I'm not quite sure what your question was.
It's not a
perhaps,
question, it's just a reflection, really.
Yeah,
and just kind of exploring some of the tensions. And
just to tell you a bit more of the Danish context, because that has its relevance, obviously. I think that one of the reasons why municipalities play a role in this area is that when you look for leisure facilities in Denmark, you often look towards the municipality that are to plan for and create leisure possibilities. They often do it in an interplay between, on the one side, volunteers, sport clubs, stuff like that, but also national authorities, obviously. And we have something that seems to be equivalent to what you mentioned. That's called the Danish Nature Agency. That's an agency that's running the forests basically for the national government. They also have some consideration about running it as a business, but they also have like more recreational parts where the paths or the trails are typically situated in. So in this presentation, we focus to a high extent on the municipal role, but it's actually more like an interplay between the municipality, the nature agency, the national agency, and then the volunteers. So it's very often like a discussion or a collaboration between these different parties. Yes, there's conflict, but what we find is that these mountain bikers are often invited early into the processes, and that gives them an ownership, and it gives them the perception of influence at least. And it also bring forwards apparently better trails, because as Matilda also mentioned, the trail builders, the volunteer trail builders, are acknowledged also from the municipality as actually having higher competencies than what is actually present in the municipality. So there's different strengths to these kind of involving approaches to building mountain bike trails. So that was a bit more about the context and how they do it. I don't know if that brings any further questions or.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, but I guess you also still have the problem of illegal trails, and there will still be some people who maybe don't cooperate and who go off do their own thing. And
yeah, and that was also a theme and something that we met when we talked to the different stakeholders around trail building. It's obviously a challenge still. But it was also our impression that part of the strategy for minimizing pirate trails is actually having good trails built so that there are good alternatives to pirate trails, right? So yeah, but that's obviously also the case in the Danish context, that you have heaps of pirate trails around, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a comment in the chat about these challenges in Australia and another layer around Indigenous land management interest.
Yeah. You're muted, Jim.
Thank you, Elspeth. Steve has a question.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, Evald, it's just a quick one, really. Did you find when you were doing the research that, I mean, were you looking at a variety of areas, or was it one specific build? Reason why I ask is, did you find that that the local government needed to have like a sort of a key local champion to sort of work with the volunteer groups? But I'm thinking about how it works, certainly where I live, and Elspeth's quite right about the Forestry Commission being, you know, there on side of the mountain bike. If you're building in an area that's not forest, which happens to be an area where I live at the moment, without the local council support, they're going to sort of shut it down because the various things like planning regulations and all sorts of other stuff. How did you find that played a part in it?
Just to understand, like a local champion, that there's someone specific in the city council or the municipality that they can contact about trail matters?
It could be somebody that's passionate about the biking or an environment, or it could be a sport. It could even just be a mayor that's wanting to sort of get this.
So what Matilda perhaps mostly talked about was like that it's important that the formal structure is in place. And that is important, obviously. But what we found also was that many of those persons operating inside that more formal structure had a high competence in mountain biking themselves, and also oftentimes mountain bike trail building themselves, right? So, and that was obviously of importance, so that the public bureaucrats having that trail builder background were able to understand the context, were able to understand the wanted needs of the volunteer trail builders. So yeah, I would definitely say that it's important to have those persons operating inside city council or public administration, because they are able to foresee or assess what's the good solution here. So yeah, definitely, yeah.
That makes sense, because obviously you need somebody to be able to sell it and understand it as well, because I think a lot of the bureaucrats and public councillors, they don't really understand cycling per se, do they?
No.
Unless they do it.
Yeah, they do it themselves, but I mean, also from the public bureaucrats that weren't bike riders themselves, they actually, to a high extent, acknowledged that the volunteer trail builders had high competencies here. So I think that it's really something that's been different in this field, also in comparison to other policy fields. That in this particular field, it seems that IMBA Europe probably and other kinds of organizations providing guidance for trail building has done a good job in actually giving some of these volunteer trail builders some really strong competencies that's acknowledged from the municipality as well.
Thanks. Very interesting. I don't know how Sheffield City Council operate, Jim, because I've not lived there for a while, but they like trail building on their land or not?
That's probably a whole different presentation, that, Steve. Maybe one for another day. I've got lots of support for what they do in Sheffield, but equally there are issues, so it's quite restrictive. But it's understandable, because there's a lack of accessible green space. So yeah, horses for courses, I guess. Evald, that's been wonderful. Thank you. Like I said before, I'm very conscious of your time, and I know you need to get off, so we'll finish the questions there.
Yep.
Thank you again. Really insightful stuff. Thank you also to Matilda. Yeah, hopefully something will come of this now. Hopefully we can continue the discussions in some other forum at some point.
Yeah. And you're welcome to contact me afterwards in any shape or form that might be appropriate for you guys, and then I'll be happy to have a chat or something. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Evald. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening around.
Bye-bye.
Yep. See ya. Bye-bye.
All right then, folks. Stefan, Elspeth, you've asked a question. Hans, Sophie, if you have any more questions for Evald or Matilda, just as a reminder, please do pop them in the chat and I'll pass them on once the session is finished. Okay, over to me then. All right, guys, let me know if you can't see that. Hopefully you can. In my presentation today, I'm going to be shifting the emphasis a little bit whilst sticking with the process of trail building. I guess whereas Evald and Matilda's presentation was quite kind of localized or regional in its approach, I'm going to be asking some more existential questions, really, some bigger questions about the role that I think, through my critical analysis, trail building can play, specifically the professionalisation, the recent developments in the professionalisation of trail building can play in addressing some of the bigger issues in the world today. And I'm going to be using the work of Bernard Stiegler, the late philosopher, who I've become particularly fond of in the last few years to enable me to do that. So, one of the things I want to address here today is recent developments in trail building education, but more specifically, the professionalisation of mountain bike trail building. In my book, my edited collection that I published last year, Mountain Biking Culture and Society, one of the things I argued at the time was that over the past 5 decades or so, mountain bike advocacy groups and various political organisations associated with mountain biking have been instrumental in mediating a range of different public concerns. And I think many of you on the call today will be familiar with what those are, but just in case you're not, the main ones that tend to stem from the public point to things like mainly relate to the kind of physical impact that mountain bikes have on landscapes. This might include things like the compaction of soils under the weight of the wheels, the erosion of soils caused by heavy braking and skidding, the damage that's inflicted on, in inverted commas, if you'll allow me that, natural trails or habitats when riders detour from sanctioned trails. And we've also got things relating to complaints relating to the social implications of mountain biking, things like safety concerns and the visual impact that, the social impact that mountain bikers and increasingly e-mountain bikers are having on those environments. And there's no doubt in my mind that advocacy groups all over the world have really helped to address some of these complaints, whilst also importantly furthering the legitimisation of mountain bikers' participation in these shared outdoor spaces. But in my book last year, one of the things I said in the introduction is that in its zeal to kind of obtain better access rights and grow grassroots participation in mountain biking, I've often found that mountain bike advocacy has kind of failed to provide sufficient justification for why participants should be included in these spaces. And I do think still to this day we have which might sound like an odd claim really, but we have a relatively poor understanding about what the mountain biker is and what that mountain biking community might want. So although I certainly have no intention of undermining or trivializing these crucial interventions by mountain bike advocacy groups at the local, the regional and the global level, I was involved in one, for example, in the Peak District called Peak District MTB for 4 years, beginning in lockdown. And I know that there's some fantastic work going on there in the community by some of my colleagues who are still working at that now. I've also in the past accused mountain bike advocacy groups of having what Slavoj Žižek describes as an anti-theoretical edge, which is I guess a way of thinking which prioritizes acting, doing things, rather than actually thinking about why we're doing those things in the first place. However, in the last couple of years, something's been kind of bubbling away beneath the surface that's really caught my eye, and it's made me reflect on two things regarding that claim. The first thing is whether or not I was maybe a little bit premature in my critique of the political orientation of mountain biking and its advocacy. And the second thing is what the future might hold for mountain bike advocacy and mountain biking in general. And this thing that I'm talking about is, like I mentioned at the start, the professionalisation of mountain bike trail building. And I guess here, just to set the scene a little bit, or to provide a definition, when we're talking about professionalisation, I take the definition from the work of recent work by Schubring on this topic, who defines professionalisation as the process whereby, in this case, mountain bike trail building shifts, in their words, from informal, often volunteer-based trail building, like the likes of which we saw in our previous presentation, towards a more regulated, standardized and economically embedded practice. And I think this is especially interesting, and I think, anyway, I'm hoping you'll agree, worthy of analysis, because some might see this as a necessary evolution of our sport. It ensures safety, it can guarantee, in some cases, environmental sustainability, arguably, and perhaps most importantly, the future viability of our sport. But others will undoubtedly kind of lament the loss of local knowledge, the creativity, that lack of grassroots identity that comes with that formalization and that professionalization. So overall, there's clearly a tension here, or an ambivalence that I find quite interesting, that I think needs to be addressed in more depth. So in what time I've got left, my aim in this presentation is to examine the professionalization of mountain bike trail building through the lens of, like I mentioned, Bernard Stiegler's philosophy, very briefly, particularly his ideas around bifurcation, which I'll explain shortly. What I want to do is argue that the professionalization of trail building isn't just a technical issue, but it's a deeply political and philosophical one. I believe, via the work of Steigler, the professionalization of mountain bike trail building can raise urgent questions about things like autonomy, techniques, which is just the way in which authorities and technologies are embedded in individual practice, care and ask important questions about this thing we're calling the Anthropocene, a world where human intervention trumps everything else. And I think perhaps even more broadly, maybe even more existentially, I guess, I think the professionalisation of mountain bike trail building might open up the possibility of a new, more collective and sustainable form of trail building. It doesn't just help us to adapt to different forms of crisis or catastrophe, but actually helps us to invent new forms of living that might orient us in moving forward in this messed up, chaotic world that we currently live in. Okay, so to set the scene a little bit, as some of you might know, mountain bike trail building has long been a practice that's rooted in things like passion, community, and improvisation, as we saw in the last presentation. From those pirate trail builders that we talked about, that carve rogue lines in the woods, that are done by kind of thrill-seeking individuals and often young people, to the kind of hand-built masterpieces that we see being developed by more professional outfits. What I've always found really interesting about mountain bike trails and mountain bike trail building is that it's always existed at that intersection between freedom, creativity, and the terrain that either allows you or prevents you from being able to do those things. So in some of my own previous work, for instance, I've argued that mountain bike trail building can, in certain circumstances, elicit important bonds with other objects and life forms, engendering new and emerging kinds of ontopolitical subjectivity. I've also, in other work, illustrated how a corporeal or an embodied and symbolic attachment to dirt can actually go one step further than that, and in some cases help trail builders through those relationships to rescue soil and the destruction of it from those very functional connotations that it's been imbued within our current modern agricultural society. And what it can actually do through that embodied corporeal relationship with dirt is it can force a relationship with the landscapes that's based on like urgency and care and protection, rather than one that is just there to be used or to harnessed by human intervention. But over the last decade, as we've seen in the work of Jan, Evan and Matilda, we've seen a bit of a shift in this. So as we've seen, local governments, land managers, tourist boards, they're increasingly involved in the development of trail networks because they understand the value, both financial, social and cultural, that these networks can have in developing the local environment and local municipalities. And I think it's here that professional trail builders who are increasingly trained, certified, as we'll see in relation to the dirt network later on, can bring with them a whole suite of different benefits. They've got technical knowledge, they can help to offset risk, they can develop the longevity of trails so that they're sustainable in the future, and they do this by working at scale rather than just in isolated individual environments. But as with any form of professionalisation, there's always a risk here that something gets lost in translations. There's a bit of a slippage between what locals want and between and what governments or public bodies might want in developing sustainable trails. I know, for instance, and this was one of the questions that I wanted to ask Matilda, I know some of the trail builders in my local woods in Warncliffe in Sheffield, which you might know, Steve, would think it would be hellish or wouldn't want to cooperate at all with a public body, because I know for sure for them, because their trails are perhaps much they're not as sanctioned, would worry about the implications of that public body having a say over how those mountain bikes should be, how those trails should be developed, maintained, and administered in the future. So there's always that tension there between what the professional bodies might want and what the local trail builders on the ground want to build and how they want to build it. And that's something I think is for me symptomatic of a broader crisis. And it's here that I think the work of Bernard Stiegler might be really useful. So Stiegler saw our world as it stands now as undergoing a profound disruption in the way that we act and the way that we behave. He argued that what he described as the neg-Anthropocene, which many of you might just know as the Anthropocene, is an era in which human activity is shaping the planet. And it's not just an environmental crisis, but it's a crisis of what he describes as care, attention, and individuation. So the technical systems that define our world, from digital platforms to supply chains, essentially, he argues, are becoming much more autonomous. And what happens as a result of this is that individuals and communities become disorientated and disempowered as a result of that automation. We become much more like robots and much less like humans, I guess. But importantly, and this is where I think trail building might come in, that crisis isn't necessarily the end. You know, it's not necessarily always bad or negative, because he describes this as a bifurcation. It's a fork in the road. It's like when we're challenged to think differently, and we can continue down that path of what he describes as entropy, which is just like repetitive, routinized, automated behavior, or we can take a different route towards care and the kind of the reconstitution and redevelopment of knowledge and desire through new forms of structural or technological engagement. And I guess why I find this interesting and Steigler's work quite useful is I think trail building can be one such site of bifurcation. So bifurcation isn't just a choice between two options. It's a moment when a system under pressure is forced to evolve in one of many multiple directions. For Steigler, bifurcation is tied to, and this is where it gets a bit technical, but he's talking about the second law of thermodynamics and this idea that all systems tend towards automation, entropy, and disorder. But what he says is these living systems, within which we might include something like trail building and trail building practice, can actually defy that entropy through the creation of negentropy, which is organized, meaningful structure that might sustain our future and sustain all forms of life on Earth. So in human terms, this means that developing new modes of existence, as we might see with the professionalisation of mountain bike trail building, new forms of care and the technical practices that go with those, can enable individuals and communities to reconstitute meaning within this so-called neganthropocene. Steigler argues that things like techniques, so tools, machines, infrastructures, they're never neutral. They shape who we are and they shape how we live. But they also carry with them the possibility of transformation at the same time, importantly. So essentially, if we can reappropriate those technical systems, those forms of knowledge, those embodied practices that we see with something like trail building, if we can design them in ways that support autonomy rather than automation, and we can improve forms of solidarity and community through empowering practice, then we can make sure that that form of bifurcation, that fork in the road, is orientated towards a different future. So overall then, when applied to trail building, I think professionalisation could either be a vector of entropy, so universality or homogenisation, sameness, or it could be a catalyst for what he describes as negentropic transformation, so difference, the sharing of difference, contestation, ambivalence regarding how we should trail build and what our reasons for doing so might be. And in doing so, hopefully we can develop more contextual and encourage more contextual and practice-based relationships with trail building practice. I guess the key to all of this, according to Steigler, is the positive value of professionalisation. And that's in not just efficiency, the efficiency of practice, but towards what Steigler describes as one of his most famous terms is the idea of individuation, which is the ways in which individuals and communities can talk with one another and engage in dialogue to enhance their practice, but also contribute to some of answering some of the most problematic issues of our time relating to natural disasters, for instance, natural catastrophes, social and political disruption, inequalities such as those Jai was talking about the other week, and Fiona around gendered and indigenous inequalities. There is a possibility here that trail building, given some of the things Steigler talks about, might be able to help with this. So, very abstract, quite dense in theory so far, but I want to give you some examples specifically about how I think this might help. So I think the first thing that the professionalisation of mountain bike trail building is doing is in the forms of knowledge that are being developed to the forms of technical, aesthetic, and embodied and situated forms of knowledge that are being developed to help people to understand how to build trails and how to build trails in certain environments. If you ask anybody who knows anything about trail building, the first thing they'll tell you is that trail builders are attuned not only to the kind of gradient and flow of the landscape, but also to different soil types, to microclimates, rider psychology. And one of the things that comes up frequently in my research, for example, is the historical uses of land and land appropriation. What the professionalisation of mountain bike trail building is doing is it's showing that this knowledge can potentially be institutionalised in ways that retain that plurality. So to give an example of this, it's quite a topical one at the moment because my colleague Tom Campbell, who unfortunately couldn't join me today for this presentation, is heading this project up along with others, is the developing inter-European resources for trail building training, otherwise known by the acronym of DIRT. Because what they're doing is they're working with specific local soil types, trying to understand things like water management, the knowledge of environmental impacts, and all of these things are listed as essential competencies under the construction phase of this trail building education framework and the professionalisation of training more generally. These are always going to be, and this is encouraged into the DIRT framework, site-specific skills that require intimate local familiarity with the landscapes and the materials and the objects that these trail builders are, that are being built into these trail building professional standards. They, as part of this research, they, as Hans will know, I'm sure, they disseminated a survey across Europe, and some of the free text responses that Thomas shared with me and are published in their report indicate that things like local adaptation, so trail builders adjusting their practice based on local weather patterns, for instance, as well as things like the contextual knowledge that goes with these places, really do have an impact on the daily operations of some of the trail builders. Another thing that's built into this process is participatory design processes, which is key to Bernard Stiegler's notion of bifurcation. Because what happens here is local riders and communities are involved from the outset, and that's deemed as another critical competency in this DIRT framework, where statistically over half of the respondents to their survey argued that negotiating with local stakeholders is an essential aspect of being a good trail builder. So what this strongly suggests to me is that local knowledge of local needs, to things like terrain and the social context involved in trail building and its professionalisation are incredibly important. Here, I think ecological sensitivity isn't just deemed a core professional competency, but it's also an important way of engaging partners as agents in that process of the build. Another thing that comes out of this process, but perhaps in a different context, is cultivating a care economy around different trails. So in essence, I think this means valuing things like maintenance, stewardship, and long-term relationality with that landscape over one-off construction builds where people are, or companies are, just parachuted into an environment and then leave as soon as that build is finished. So I guess what this means overall is that it means embedding trail building practice within broader networks and knowledge around land care, ecological restoration, as well as things like community health, both in terms of a social and economic health. So an example of this would be in Tasmania, in Australia. There's a company called Dirt Art currently, who are a trail design and construction company. And they're developing, by all accounts, a pioneering model of mountain bike trail development that at its core centres on ecological care and significantly the idea of rewilding. So rather than imposing like a rigid infrastructure on natural landscapes, what the folks at Dirt Art are trying to do is to embrace a design philosophy that works with the environment, following its natural contours and preserving existing vegetation and flora and fauna, and therefore trying to integrate these trails into the rhythms of that ecosystem, trying to be true to that the rhythms of that ecosystem. And this approach, I guess, reflects a deep commitment to what might be called a care economy, which is another aspect of the professionalisation standards here, which is a system in which value is generated not just from the extraction of enjoyment or human enjoyment from these mountain bike trails, but also in developing and directly encouraging and advocating for trails as being part of landscapes. And part of that is also, as is evident in the Dirt Art project, it's about seeing trails as corridors for wildlife, about seeing them as climate adapted infrastructures and invitations for riders to attune themselves to what has in the sociological literature been described as the kind of more than human worlds that these mountain bikes come into contact with. Finally, I think professional trail builders in these professional frameworks are increasingly being framed or reframed, not just as service providers, but what, if you'll allow me to use another one of Bernard Stiegler's terms, are often described as pharmacological agents. And pharmacology, essentially, in Bernard Stiegler's philosophy, is just this idea that techniques and mountain bike trails, in this case, can be both a poison and a cure. So the same tools, the same processes that alienate us can also reorientate us to the world if used in a different way, or in a way that might create knowledge or create a different form of practice. And in this sense, I guess trail builders have the potential to be pharmacological agents. They can channel the technical power of rakes, machines, objects, tree stumps, soil, rocks, and so on, to potentially develop more dynamic and more diverse relationships with these landscapes and with other human beings, which is important, and maybe even other forms of life. So another example of this is the Flagstaff Trails initiative in Arizona, because what they do is they focus specifically and explicitly on a collaborative and cross-jurisdictional effort, which involves people like land managers, conservationists, indigenous representatives, and recreational land users. And their whole mission, as part of this FTI, Flagstaff Trails Initiative, is to balance that human demand for recreational riding with things like conservation, cultural preservation, and long-term sustainability. So what this does, I think, overall, is especially the FTI initiative there, is it demonstrates how professional trail builders can act as mediators between, I guess, humans and living organisms and landscapes. Because in doing what they're doing and embedding this in professional practice, they're transforming trails into spaces that promote ecological health, they promote community well-being, and perhaps especially given the kind of ongoing cultural wars and lack of commitment to different forms, protecting different forms of culture, especially in parts of Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, for instance, where there are inequalities relating to indigenous knowledge. There can be an element of cultural sensitivity in this, paying respects to and being respectful of the land that is being used to build these trails. And that increasingly is, I'm finding, being built into these trail building practices. Okay, I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm just gonna skip to my last slide there, because I realise that we're quick running out of time. I guess overall, what I want to just finish on here is just thinking about this idea of bifurcation. So overall, I think the professionalisation of trail building is happening. It's happening at quite a pace, and it's something that is quite a divisive issue. It's quite something that some people think is inherently good. Some people think is inherently bad. However, I would argue that the professionalisation of mountain bike trail building acts as a fork in the road. It gets us to think about not only trail building and mountain biking, but also what these two things might contribute to the world at large. How might we use these practices and the professionalisation of trail building standards and the subsequent education that follows from that to develop human practice, to get us thinking critically about the world, to maybe be more reflective and reflexive about how we use different landscapes and for what purposes. I genuinely believe that the professionalisation of trail building isn't necessarily inherently good or bad, but it can help to encourage those kinds of conversations. There's two different ways this could go. On the one hand, this could the professionalisation of mountain biking could lead to what Bernard Stiegler describes as entropy. It could lead to more automation. It could lead to repetitive practice. It could lead to individuals being educated in such a way as they don't necessarily have the ability to think for themselves, one might argue. But on the other hand, it might more positively lead to forms of negentropy, which are where people see their trails as sites of care, as invention, creativity, and perhaps more importantly, one of, especially given the climate crisis, one of ecological attunement. If we're going to choose this second path, if we're going to make sure that the professionalisation of mountain bike trail is oriented in the right ecological and sustainable way, what we've got to do, I think, is take responsibility, not just as riders, but as trail builders, but as I guess citizens of the Anthropocene, for reappropriating our practices, reorientating with ourselves within a world, and understanding our relationship with everything from tools to machinery to the soils that we deal with to the weather in different environments, as a way and via our professional practices, understanding how we can embed these in more formalized and institutionalized ways of working that can perhaps encourage more positive relationships with the climate and with our planet. Overall, I think the reason I think Stiegler's work is quite useful is because he reminds us that every natural, social, political crisis carries with it a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance for both renewal and regeneration. And I genuinely believe that in the professionalisation of mountain bike trail building, we have one such chance. And I guess that chance would be to not just build better trails and more exciting rideable trails, but to build better worlds and build a better planet through the act of doing so. Okay, that's everything from me. Thank you very much for listening. I now welcome any questions if you've got them. Elsbeth, yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry to be the one jumping in every time.
No, please do.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that. So where do we find the most concentration of professional trail builders? And I was thinking about the commercial bike parks with uplift that are on private land and things that are booming in the UK and growing in number. So their motivation there is they've got to make a profit because they employ people and it's a business. At the same time, they've got to protect the environment because if they trash it in the process of people riding it, they're not going to, so they've got to be environmentally sustainable within that. And yet they've got to create interest so that riders keep coming back and paying lots of money for that uplift and that experience. So I guess that tunes in with what the things that you're saying about the kind of move to the professionalisation of trail building. And then the other example I was thinking about is the alpine resorts around the world where they're having to diversify because there's shorter and shorter ski seasons, there's less reliable snow. So what they're doing is developing mountain biking networks in the summer. So that's happening all over the Alps in Europe and in North America as well. And they're very, very aware of climate change and the environmental impacts. But the same thing, they've got to turn a profit. People pay, the trails might be free, but you've got to pay for the cable car access and so on. And so they've got a huge body of professional trail builders, and I'm sure they don't use volunteers in those communities. They're the same on the private bike parks. Why would you? They're commercial entities or they're, part of business. So I just wondered whether you agree with kind of what I'm using for those examples. I think it tunes in with what you're arguing here, or because you kind of focus more on the kind of community type stuff and the sort of like a different kind of environment. And I'm thinking about the commercial environment and the side of mountain biking and some of those other aspects. So again, that's just me kind of having some reflections and comments, and I'm just happy to bounce ideas off people Yeah, but thank you. Interesting.
Great. Cheers, Elspeth. Yeah. Okay. So one of the things I'm really keen to keep hold of is, to use Donna Haraway's term, I think it's important, really important to stay with the trouble. It's very easy to dismiss. One of the problems we have in mountain biking specifically, which you may or may not know about, Elspeth, I'm sure you do, is we all different user groups, different users of the countryside and open green space tend to war with one another and always point the finger at one another about who is more damaging to the environment, who erodes the landscape, who destroys more of the plant life, who disrupts different habitats more than one another. But I actually think it's really important to stay with those debates and those antagonisms, because what that does is it teaches us actually more about what we have in common than what separates us. And I guess the reason we're all falling out, and sorry, I'll get to your point in a moment about ski resorts and things like that and private land. What we all have in common is a number of things globally. We're witnessing, whether you're a member of an indigenous community or you're just someone like me, one of the things that we're all subject to increasingly is the process of enclosure and land, the privatization of land. Another thing that we're witnessing globally is obviously global climate change and the change in those environments, which no doubt for me kind of exacerbates some of those problems that we have with one another, because erosion is increasing and disruption of landscapes and habitats is increasing. So then when we think about that and how that might transpose onto the environment of the ski slope the ski slope or the alpine resort, I think that's really important to keep hold of, because the thing that we're all subject to there is I guess more broadly, it's capitalism and the commodification of those landscapes, which is a global problem. And I think it's really important to keep hold of those antagonisms and appreciate that all the problems that come with that, as well as all the opportunities, for excitement, fun, entertainment, and so on. So that's the way I'd go with that. If that answers your question, is to keep challenging capitalist practices that commodify natural landscapes, see them as a human resource to be harvested and harnessed for human enjoyment, and to keep going with that critique. Does that answer your question?
That's very nice and interesting, but I mean, if you live in an alpine resort and you're dependent on tourism for your livelihood, yeah, it is a capitalist privatized activity. I mean, yeah, at some level, if you pedal power and you're prepared to bike up the trails, it's free access, but most people aren't. Yeah, interesting.
So
yeah,
what I would say, I'm one of a handful. I'm one of the few people I think who's quite willing and open to talk about how I think these so-called pirate trails, as we're calling them, actually can have quite a radical influence on society in a positive way. So you mentioned the Forestry Commission or Forestry England and the kind of problems they might have with illegal or unsanctioned trails. Do you not think in a way there's when framed in a particular fashion, you could actually suggest that those trails that are being built because a lot of the people who build them are kind of sick of enclosure. They're sick of riding trails that are sanitized and built in a way that are kind of seem to be most appealing to the general public. And I guess what I'm arguing is sometimes you could argue those private and sanctioned trails are a form of resistance to more dominant mountain bike cycling practices.
Yeah, but then there's also the kind of private trails on private bits of land, just round and about. I mean, where I live in East Yorkshire, you can go on some of those apps and you can say, oh, there's some trails that people are riding. Then you go there and somebody says, no, this isn't your land, get off. So it's not all harmonious within the mountain biking community. That's one mountain biker to another and saying, well, this is our patch. Have you got a right to be here or not? So there's a lot of layers of complexity, I guess, in all of this. Lots to unpack, lots to think about. But yeah, I'd like to hear from other people as well, from other parts of the world too. And I don't know who Mike Vanderman is, whoever put the comment in the chat, but that's for me to look up and learn.
We could talk about that in our next meeting, Elsbeth. Jai's put the cat amongst the pigeons there. Steve,
I don't know how many of you know. I mean, yeah, we can take a poll. Who knows who Mike Vanderman is?
Yeah, I mean, just I'm okay with an increase in professionalisation. I mean, you mentioned Warncliffe Woods. Actually, when I was still living in Sheffield, when that sort of was in its infancy, and I know it's took a huge leap forward over the last probably 6-7 years. Warncliffe Woods, it's been, some of the purists consider it's been a little bit too developed. But I mean, it's a great facility. Sorry, that's one of my dogs. It's okay, providing that some of the trails don't start to look a bit samey. So, like, sometimes where I am, I sometimes go on some of the Seven Stains in the Scotland area, and I've got to admit, while it's a great facility, not knock it at all. And obviously that's all part of the forestry authority in Scotland. You do sometimes forget which one you're on because they're all a little bit similar. So yeah, the pirate trails, I mean, the sort of pureness of it, it's great as long as we don't lose that originality. I think that's my sort of thoughts on it.
yes, and yeah, you have to keep that creativity. That, I mean, trail building at its core is a form of expression, right? We need to make sure we keep hold of that. And I guess the way you do that is you make sure that you're able to account for that in, for example, the professionalisation of trail building itself, but also encourage that local knowledge. And by that, I mean like what the landscape offers, but also what the locals want. And that's really difficult because I know in Scotland, like at in Elithan, for example, in what is otherwise known as the Golfie, even there, I mean, that's kind of widely thought of as being like a mecca for off-piste trails. But even within that, you've got lots of debate, haven't you, about what locals want from that. Recently, they kind of they rebuilt some of the older trails there and manicured them a little bit, didn't they? And I know many of the locals were quite upset about that because they would prefer the trails that have just essentially been ridden in by people's bikes and given, you know, the odd touch up with a shovel rather than being manicured in any way. So yeah, there's definitely a tension there, and it's something that's, based on my research on trail building, is very difficult to accommodate. It's very difficult to accommodate everybody's expectation around what kind of trails they might want. But I guess at its core, we need to keep hold of the fact that mountain bike trail building is about creativity. It's a form of expression. You could even go as far as argue it's a form of art, and allowing people in their own way to try and express themselves in that fashion.
If I can just make a brief comment back on that, if it's all right, Jim. Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing as well, and using that in Elithan example around Peebles, is obviously the more developed and more successful they are, they've all got the car parks and the expanded car parks, and that puts off some purists. And like you said, in Elithan, some of them go on this, I think they called it the Ridge. Somebody took me up there once. It's sort of basically, it's not an official trail, but you can't park your car to get to it, that kind of thing. And it's a bit of, and it's just going back to the old days, really. And if you've been mountain biking for 20 odd years, you sort of hark back to that bit of a sort of a doing something that you maybe shouldn't be, wish, rather than the full development. A bit more exciting, but obviously not as developed. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's a great point, Steve. Thank you, guys. I'm gonna bring the session to a close there, because it is now 7:30 in the UK, and I don't like to go over the allocated hour and a half if I can. Just in bringing the session to a close, just very, very briefly, Elspeth's pointed out that this has the wrong year on it. My apologies. That is my shabby administration. But if I could just show you this before we go, for the benefit as well of those people who may be watching later on. Yeah, so the next session is on the 19th of June. Steve, you'll be presenting, won't you, with your colleague Steve Taylor, so the two Steves, on electric mountain bikes and their inextricable rise over the past kind of decade or so. And we've also got Hans, who is on the call today as well, from IMBA Europe, who is going to be talking to us about the latest developments in promoting mountain biking for off-road cyclists in Europe. It'd be great to see all of you, as well as people who might be watching the YouTube video later on at that session. It promises to be another really interesting and insightful discussion around mountain bike advocacy, maybe against the backdrop of the rise of the electric mountain bike, and how perhaps, I'm hoping, how we can encourage new forms of advocacy that might take account of the electric mountain bike as well as more traditional forms of mobility. Okay, guys, so that's it from me today. Another thanks to all of the presenters today, specifically Matilda and Evald. Sorry. Hope to see you at the next one, and all the best in the time between this and the next session. Thank you. Cheers, Jai.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks, great to be a part of it, Jim. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Steve.